and start the meeting. I apologize. I'm having technical difficulties. My camera is not working, and I know it's kind of challenging when the person chairing the meeting, you can't see that person. So I apologize, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and start with roll call, take attendance for the directors that are in attendance. And then I also just kind of want to clarify what's happening tonight in terms of we have 2 different meetings scheduled. So what's happening for each meeting. So let's go ahead and do roll call to start the committee of the whole meeting. Director Barrows.
I am here.
Director Sproul.
Here.
Director Zavala.
Here.
And then I am here. Director Decker is out of town, so she's obviously not able to chair our meeting, which is why I'm stepping in for her tonight. Before we go into our agenda for the committee of the whole meeting, I just want to clarify because it can be kind of confusing. We have 2 different meetings happening tonight. This one right now at 5:30 is our committee of the whole meeting, where we will be reviewing proposed policies and looking at some recommendations from our instructional materials committee. And there's no action happening in this part of the meeting. And then at 6 o'clock, we have a special meeting scheduled for a second reading and possible vote on proposed policy 4300, immigrant and refugee students, families, and staff. So that the potential vote won't be happening until the 6 o'clock portion of the second meeting. That will be happening here in about a half an hour. So with that clarification, I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Snell to walk us through our agenda for our committee of the whole meeting.
Thank you, Director Smith. Appreciate you filling in tonight for Director Decker. Very short superintendent report, actually just taking the slide from our regular meeting last Tuesday. Just want to acknowledge the support of our community with the levy vote. Appreciate everyone that voted, and looks like at this point the election hasn't been certified yet, but we just had another ballot count that was released this evening, and we're at about 53.7%, I think, in favor. So appreciate that, and a lot of hard work went into putting a resolution together that feel like reflects what the community wants for their students. So appreciate you on board and making that happen. And then just acknowledge that Thursday and Friday were interesting days, as we thought, and did not end up having school on either of those days. And so we'll have some makeup days and communication that will be going out. Those are already on the calendar, but just acknowledging that that impacts a lot of schedules and a lot of stuff going on over the last couple of school days. So with that, if it's okay with you, Director Smith, I'll just pull up our agenda for the committee of the whole and start walking through some of the items that you'll see at the March board meeting. And we have Taylor Richmond here to walk us through some of the procedures and policies updates. Okay, if I proceed?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, and Taylor, I'll go ahead and pull up the first one, which are our procedural updates.
Great, thank you. So yeah, every committee of the whole, we just post these for the public. These are not items that we ask the board to take action on. They're the superintendent's procedures. I did want to highlight a couple of the procedures that Dr. Snell has reviewed and will be going into effect later this month. There's been a lot of changes to the Title IX rules. Those are rules around sexual harassment and our grievance procedures, whether a student or a staff member complains about potential sexual harassment. So we had just, the board had actually recently adopted new Title IX policies, and we had updated our procedures to go with those policies in light of some changes to the Title IX regulations, in which the rules are reverting back to the rules that were put in place in 2020. We are updating our procedure yet again, and are in the process of bringing an updated policy to the board. But so I just wanted to highlight that our grievance procedure for sexual harassment for students and for staff is being updated and will be posted on our on board docs at the end of the month. Okay, then we have two policies. So the first one is policy 4300. This will be up for the board's consideration, a second read and consideration at the meeting right after this. As Director Smith said, this is our new policy for immigrant and refugee students, family, and staff. As we discussed last week at the board meeting, this is a policy that's based on the state attorney general's model policy regarding immigration enforcement in schools and the steps to comply with the Keep Washington Working Act. We also noted last week that this policy is consistent with the school district's current practices in these areas. So that will be up for a second read and your potential vote in 25 minutes. Then we have a second read that will take place at next month's board meeting. Policy 6210, purchasing authorization and control. The revisions to this policy reflect a change to the board's financial governance practices, and specifically the sort of financial threshold for board review and approval of expenditures and new contracts, setting that threshold at $150,000, and then for any continuing contracts, those would come back to the board if the annual increase to the contract or expenditure increases by more than 10%. So if there are any questions about either of those two policies, happy to respond to them.
I wasn't sure, since we are having the special meeting next, like if we just wanted to touch on policy 4300. I appreciate, Taylor, all the effort that's gone into kind of putting this in place, getting our language in line with the Attorney General's recommendation policy. I know that it doesn't change our practice that the district does, but I think that the affirmation of this policy is important to just ease the anxiety in our community and to support our families, because obviously we're here first and foremost for our student safety.
Thank you.
I don't necessarily have questions about this policy. So again, I'm not sure whether the best time is to ask now or maybe when we're actually voting on the policy. But I know you mentioned that the policy doesn't necessarily change our current practice. And I know there's been like communication that's gone out to like administrators about what our practice and procedures are. I'm wondering, as Director Sproul mentioned, I feel like this policy eases a little bit of anxiety for some members of our community. So I'm wondering if there is a plan or kind of what the communication about this, I guess what communication has gone out to families about this policy or like our district procedures, or is it kind of, I don't know if there's like I don't know if there's all emails or specific families that might be more impacted, or kind of what the communication plan is, if there's one.
Yeah, a couple of things. So first, staff were aware of this in terms of we pushed out messaging to all staff this yesterday morning about the guidelines, and that the board would be considering this policy. And if the board approves it, we would follow up with messaging out to staff. And then to the larger community as well, we have already communicated what we do and do not do as a part of our policy and procedures. So that communication went out in January, but we would also follow up with this new review of, this is all put into one place and was approved by the board in messaging that would go out that way as well.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I do have a question, I guess two questions and then a comment. First of all, Taylor, at our last regular board meeting, there were a series of questions that were presented to the board, and you were super responsive in getting us answers and information about that. So I really appreciate that. And I'm not going to put you on the spot now, but my question is, I'm assuming you're going to be available at the 6 o'clock portion of the meeting as well, because I think it would be helpful to have just kind of a quick debrief or explanation of maybe some of that information that was shared in response to those very specific questions before the vote happens. So I guess my question is, Taylor, you're going to be there at 6 o'clock, right?
That's an easy question. Yes, I'll be there at 6
Okay.
o'clock.
And then maybe you might wrap your head around or prepare yourself to share some of that information that was specifically asked about at our last meeting, because I think they were really important questions and they were super helpful to me, especially in thinking about this policy. My second question is, it does not appear to me, and I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. It doesn't look like there have been any changes made between the first reading and the second reading to the policy.
That's correct. Yeah, it's the same exact version as was presented last week.
Right. And then the comment I would just make is that I know that our process for this particular policy is kind of outside of our normal kind of procedures that we typically would follow for considering and voting on policies. And I just want to be kind of transparent in that the board's intention here is to kind of move this particular policy along a little bit faster in an effort to be reassuring to our community that we are paying attention, that this is a priority for us, and that we want people to absolutely feel safe sending their students and coming to our schools, continuing to volunteer and stay connected with their school communities, as well as our staff, that they feel safe coming to work. And so the only reason why we have kind of deviated from our normal procedure is to address that kind of sense of urgency in making sure people feel safe and supported, and that their district is taking steps to protect them and take care of them. Are there any other questions or comments with regards to either one of the policies or the procedural updates? Okay, then I think we can go ahead and move into the teaching and learning portion of our agenda.
Thank you, Director Smith. Yeah, there is one item, recommendation to approve instructional materials. As usual, this is packaged with the overall instructional materials committee report and overview of the items that are for your consideration. And they are, as usual, flagged if there's challenging content and some context for that and the intended audience. So I don't think any of those were flagged for challenging content in this draft, but always have this available for you if there are any questions, and happy to answer any if you have them now.
It doesn't sound like there are any questions. And I believe that's the last item on our agenda, correct?
Yeah, it is. So
Okay.
that's all we have at this time. And of course, if we have more additions, we will loop the board in on that before I think it's March 11th is our next board meeting. So
Yeah, I think so. All right, then, well, we are going to, I guess, adjourn our committee of the whole meeting. And then we will be back using the same Zoom link. We'll be back at 6 o'clock for the special meeting for the purpose of the second reading and potential vote on that proposed policy 4300. All right, so we'll see everybody back here at 6. All right. I took advantage of the break to do some troubleshooting. I got my camera to work. So now y'all can see me, which makes things a little bit easier. It is 6 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and start our special meeting. We'll go ahead and take roll call again, since it is a separate meeting from our previous one. So Director Barrows,
Here.
Director Sproul,
Here.
Director Zavala,
Here.
and I obviously am here as well. And once again, Director Decker is not able to join us tonight. So that is why I am stepping in to chair the meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to conduct a second reading and possible adoption for policy 4300, immigrant and refugee students, families, and staff, which we just had an opportunity to review in our committee of the whole meeting at 5:30. But there is this provides another opportunity to answer questions and have some discussion around it, and then potentially take a vote. Before we can do any of that, however, I do need a motion to consider the policy.
I'll move.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, now we can ask questions and discuss it, and then move to a vote as well. Before I open it up for questions and discussion, I do just want to state again, I mentioned this in our last meeting, but this is obviously not our usual operating procedure when it comes to adopting new policy. Typically, we would have a first reading at our regular board meeting, which we did at our last board meeting. We had a first reading, and then we would wait for our next regular board meeting a month later to have a second reading and move it for a vote. But the board felt there was some urgency around this particular policy, and we wanted to move it forward a little bit faster than our normal typical timeline would allow for. So on that note, are there any questions or comments that you directors want to make about this policy?
I think, I apologize for being repetitive, but just to be current with this special meeting. I think one reason I'm very comfortable adopting this policy and doing it with a little bit more urgency than normal is we have families and students who are feeling anxious and insecure in our community. And even though this policy pretty much reiterates the practices we already have in place, it does follow our state best practice, and it just formalizes our affirmation to protect our students and families, which I know is really important. This is it can be an unsettling time, and I want to make sure that our students can access their education without fear and anxiety.
I agree. I also just wanted to add, I asked in our previous meeting about the communication plan, because I think we know that, you know, if we approve this policy tonight, that there's a policy in place, but I think it's important for families and students to also know that this is something that we have put into place. And even though it was our practice previous, that there is a policy that you know, is in writing that talks about this. And so being able to reassure our families and being able to communicate to families is important. And so thank you for answering those questions in our committee meeting about communication to those most impacted by this policy.
I also just wanted to share appreciation and being able to get this done in a timely manner. I know it's not, as our board directors have stated, it's not per usual, but I appreciate the urgency in this. I've been in rooms with students in our communities who has wanted this done, and so I'm really appreciative. And there are going to be spaces where this information is going to be shared in the future. It's just not being publicized in hopes to be safe for our community. So I just wanted to share that. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as Director Sproul pointed out, it doesn't really change the current practice in any substantive way, but having it in writing and having it available for the public to access and see the steps that the district would take in these different situations, I think is very reassuring for people to be able to see that. I'm gonna ask Taylor to just briefly give kind of an overview of what this policy does with regards to its implementation, which we've had some questions around. So I'm curious, Taylor, if you can just kind of give a quick explanation of not the purpose of the policy, but rather like the implementation. What would this potentially look like in action?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I know that we had public comment at last week's meeting on this topic of sort of what are the roles for our various staff groups. I thought it might be helpful to just sort of walk not in super depth, but through some of the sections to just sort of highlight what those sections are about and the various roles that staff play in those sections. So the first part is definitions, and a key element of this is to put a definition for court order and judicial warrant in place to be consistent with state law. As we'll see in the section on sort of our process for responding to immigration enforcement, if that were to happen at a school, for that to happen, there has to be a lawful court order or judicial warrant. And so this definition explains what that is and what Dr. Snell and I would be reviewing any order or warrant for to determine compliance. So on the next page, there are a few sections. I want to highlight the section 3, access to schools. This is consistent with Director Sproul's comments about the importance of assuring our community that it is our role as a school district to provide safe schooling to all students, regardless of their status, who reside within our boundaries. After that, the policy gets into a bit more of what happens on campus. So section 4 is our policy and the steps if there is an effort to enforce a court order or a judicial warrant, or an effort at immigration enforcement without that documentation. So this section applies both to all staff, anyone who does come into contact with an immigration official, and it directs staff members to have that person be in touch with the school principal. So the school principal is the primary point person at all of our schools for interacting with any immigration official. And then the school principal will be in contact with central office, specifically the superintendent and legal counsel, for review of documentation and our consult and direction for next steps. Along with that, there is a parent notification process if there is any enforcement effort at school. Section 5, gathering immigration related information. This is also a section that applies broadly to all staff, as we have various staff members who interface with families and receive information about families and students. And so we wanted to have this section consistent with the Attorney General's model policy be broad and applied to all staff, and the sensitivities around handling information and what information we do and do not receive about students and their immigration status. Section 6 is responding to requests for information. This is if an immigration official asked for documentation from the school, from school records, student records or staff records. And this section, again, is applicable to all staff, directing them to direct the inquiry to the principal, again, to get advice from the superintendent and general counsel for how to proceed. But so we were intentional as we went through this policy with having the areas that where an immigration official might have interaction with various staff members on campus, having this policy say staff in those instances, and then directing staff to have the process flow through the school principal, who will be in communication and receive guidance from the superintendent and general counsel. And then the last thing I wanted to highlight was just the final section on use of school resources. We have we are collecting resources and posting them. And one of the places we're doing that is on our website. So that has some resources that are available. So with that, if there are any other questions, I'm happy to respond to them.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Taylor. Are there any other questions with regards to the proposed policy?
I don't have a question for Taylor, but I did just want to circle back to Director Zavala. And I just wanted to appreciate the clarification that she got around communication on the policy in very purposeful and specific ways, which was kind of what I was asking about earlier. So thank you for kind of sharing that piece, Director Zavala.
Okay, so I'm not seeing or hearing any other questions or comments. Then we'll go ahead and move to the vote. Director Barrows,
Approve.
Director Sproul,
Approve.
Director Zavala,
Approve.
and I also approve. So the motion passes and the policy is adopted. And that is all we have on the agenda for this meeting. So we will adjourn at 6:12, and thank you everybody for your time. Have a good night.